Hey, my name's Alex Hollingsworth. I work here at Tileyard Education as a studio and technical manager, and we are going to be running through basic navigation in the arrangement window in Pro Tools. So the arrangement window is the first window that you'll see when you open up Pro Tools, and there are numerous different parts in it that I'm going to take you through now. So this main part here that you see in the arrangement window is where we keep all of our audio tracks, our MIDI tracks, instrument tracks, etc. You'll see two windows the either side of the arrangement view. We've got one over here, which is your overview of all of your tracks, and you've got one over here, which is your overview of all your clips. Your clips are the individual tracks that you record into the arrangement window. So starting off, we're going to pull up an old audio file that I recorded. It's a horrific voiceover, so please don't judge me for it. But what we're going to do is just start off with playing it. 1, 2, this is Alex from Tileyard Education. I am checking the microphone for our basic recording tutorial in Pro Tools. So to start off with, we're going to be covering the three main tools that we'll be using in Pro Tools. These are the trim tool, the selector tool, and the grab tool. And you can use all of these three in what's called a multi-tool in Pro Tools. So what we're going to do, if we hover towards the top of the clip, we can have the selector tool, where you can highlight and drag and select any piece of audio that you want. You can use the grab tool on the bottom of the clip, where you can grab the audio clip and drag it wherever you want. And we can use the trim tool, which will be right at the end of the clip. We can hover here and trim it to wherever we want on both sides. These three are the main ones that you'll use in Pro Tools, and you can use them simultaneously or you can use them individually. So if you only want to use the trim tool, you can. If you only want to use the selector tool, you can. And if you only want to use the grab tool, then you can. What I was saying about the hovering on different parts of the track won't be apparent when you're using individual tools. Now, either side of this, you have a zoom tool, which you can use to zoom into audio clips. And on the right, you have what's called a scrub tool. I am checking. The scrub tool is used to pick out any anomalies in the audio and just to kind of slow it right down and just hear if there was anything wrong in the audio or any glitches or anything like that. So that's the scrub tool, and then you can use the pencil tool as well, which is much more applicable for things like automation and MIDI, CC, and other things that will go into greater detail throughout this series. So those are our 5 main tools that we can use in Pro Tools. Each one has an individual sub-menu. So on the grab tool, you can change them. On the trim tool, you can also change them to things like time stretching and scrubbing and looping. And you can also change it on the pencil tool as well to have multiple different shapes. We'll go through these in greater detail in future videos. So after these tools, we can see the main counter. We have bars and beats, we have minutes and seconds, the time code if you're working a lot with picture, feet and frames, and samples. Now, the main one if you're working specifically with music that you're going to be using here is obviously bars and beats. We can change that counter just by going on this small arrow here and changing it to minutes and seconds like so. Now, over on the right, we have the start time of the cursor, the end time of the cursor, and if you want to make a loop, just by going on our selector tool and dragging there, we can find how long that loop is by there, which can be really useful if you want to find a certain timing length of a particular section. We also have other parts of this main counter, things like delay, compensation, and we can see whether a track is soloed here as well, which is very useful if you're in a very large session and you don't know why you haven't got any sound. There are other features of this main counter, but for now I feel that the most important thing that you need to understand is the bars and beats and the minutes and seconds and the ability to change it through this small arrow here. So just moving right, we have our grid and our nudge modes. So if we just click on the grid, you can see that these lines on the arrangement window have now gone. And what we can do on the grid is if we click on this crotchet icon here, we can change our grid value to different rhythmic subdivisions. So for example, if we wanted a 16th note, we can see that the grid lines have changed appropriately. if we want a 30-second note, we can see that the grid lines have changed appropriately, and so on and so forth. You can change it to either minutes and seconds, bars and beats, or time code, feet and frames, just like we did in the main counter here. So I'm going to change my grid lines back to quarter notes or crotchets, only because I don't need 16ths or 30 seconds at the moment. So after our grid values, we can then go into our nudge values. If you press the greater than and less than signs, you can simply nudge an audio clip by whatever value you like. And the way that you choose that is exactly the same as grid. You could go and choose bars and beats, minutes and seconds, or whatever value that you want. And when you click on that, you can either choose a quarter note, eighth note. We can choose a 30-second note, for example, and it will nudge it by that value. This is extremely useful when you want to be editing audio and you just want to nudge it back by a few milliseconds, and you can do that by going to minutes and seconds, go to the value, 1 millisecond, and if we zoom right in by clicking T, you'll see we can nudge it by very small amounts, which is very useful when you want to have really accurate edits. So moving along, we're going into our transport bar here. Now there are numerous options for playing and recording and stopping and things like that. So I'm going to go on to the main three, which is the play, stop and record. Now there are numerous different record modes that you can use in Pro Tools. If I right click on this here, we have our normal mode, loop, destructive, quick punch. I'm going to go into details on these in future videos, but for now we're going to click on quick punch and keep it like that. What quick punch does is that if you're hitting play and you need to very quickly record something for an overdub, or if you're dropping someone in to record a single part of a middle eight, for example, you can hit 3 on your numeric keypad and it will record straight away. Now going onto the play modes, you've got exactly the same thing. You can either have loop, half speed, or prime for playback. At the moment, we're going to take it off loop and just have it on normal loop mode. And notice that the icon changes when you click on loop or not. And then after play, we obviously have stop. Now I would never normally use play and stop icons because the easiest way to play and stop is just by hitting the space bar. There are other tools that you can use on the right side of the transport bar, things like activating metronomes and having a pre-roll before you record, but I'm going to go into detail on those when we start doing a basic audio recording in Pro Tools. Okay, so moving on to tracks now. We have multiple different tracks in Pro Tools, but for the sake of this starting tutorial, we're just going to be dealing with an audio track. You'll have 4 main options here. You have the record enable, which you need to activate if you want to record anything. You have input monitoring if you want to hear yourself back in your headphones. You have solo, which obviously solos the track, and you have mute, which mutes the track. These are the 4 main options that you'll be using in Pro Tools to begin with, so we won't go into the playlists and automation yet, but we'll be covering them in future videos. If you look on the right here, we have an option for inserts, which is where you put your plugins, and sends is where you send things like reverbs and delays to an auxiliary channel, which we'll discuss in a future video. So a tab that is very important in this tracks bar is the I/O setup, which stands for ins and outs. The top one, as you can see here, is the inputs, which is where you select all of your different inputs for your interface, and the tab underneath it is your output, which assigns the output to your interface. Most of the time, if you're recording a small interface that has 2 inputs and 2 outputs, for example, you'll be using input 1 in your interface, which we can select, and the stereo out, which we can select there. So underneath the I/O tab, we have our volume and panning, which is very easily accessible and a very useful feature when mixing. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial on basic navigation around the arrangement window in Pro Tools. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.